here. Okay. Hi, friends. We are glad you can join us for the fourth podcast in our series titled Unraveling Financial Wellness. Last week's discussion on financial trauma and family dynamics was amazing. This week, we will explore the psychological impact of debt, its effects on mental health and well-being, strategies you can use to cope with that stress, and how to get support if you're struggling with debt. Now, today, our panel is Charles Bartlett, who has his MBA in business and is also pursuing his master's in clinical psychology and is an amazing resource for us on the mental and emotional aspects of finances. We have Aubrey Bain from Dollars and Good Cents, as well as Derek Wesley from IMAR Learning Solutions. So let's go ahead, guys, and dive right in, if that's okay. And I'd like to, if it's okay, to just start with just a few stats, because of course, with debt, we want to talk about that. So if you were to go out to debt.org, another place you can look at is called The Motley Fool. I can just give you some interesting debt statistics as of September 30th, 2024. We had, as a nation, $17.9 trillion of consumer debt. Of that, 70% was mortgages. We had $1.2 trillion of credit card debt and $1.6 trillion of student loan debt. And when you compare that year over year, debt has gone up 11% in the last 2 years. So with those numbers and seeing how much they've increased, I think that talking about the financial impact and the emotional trauma of debt is really a timely topic. So the first question, let's talk about how does debt affect people's mental health and well-being?
Well, I think like the two common things would be chronic stress as well as shame. Chronic stress, and that first off, like you're in a hole that your current income can't cover, and especially if you're not even able to pay off the balance in the month, and your balance goes to the next month, you're now accruing more debt, and so you're always stressed about that. That leads to hopelessness. I'm never going to get out of that. That could lead to impulsive spending or doing impulsive things like gambling on penny stocks to try to get out of that. And also created shame. I've had friends that are in credit card debt. They're less able to be out socially, both because they don't have the economic means to go out and get dinner or go somewhere, but also like they're embarrassed about it. So not only can it lead to like chronic stress from trying to repay the debt or hopelessness of trying to, but also the shame and if other people saw me, like if I talked about that, a lot of people think less of me. So then you become more isolated, which psychologically, if you isolate more, you're going to get more anxiety, depression, and which just exacerbates the mental health concerns. But yeah, definitely chronic stress and shame would be the two things that stand out immediately for me.
I would say, great response, Charles. So how does that affect mental health? One of the issues I've seen is that once you start to take on the debt, that you just keep digging yourself deeper and deeper into the hole. And some people like to say out of sight, out of mind, right? And so if you don't address the issues, if you don't put together a plan to tackle the debt, it's not going to go away. And thank you for sharing those stats. When it comes to the student loan debt, you eventually have to pay that back. And so that is stressful. So having friends and family members that have student loan debt and trying to figure out, okay, yes, I want to get an education, but then how do I pay for it? And I think that's why these conversations that we have are so important, because we want to be able to prevent people from going into debt, and then also figuring out what are some options if you are in debt, so you can dig yourself out of the hole. It's not impossible, but you have to start somewhere. And so that would be the challenge overall, to figure out where do you start so that you can start to get yourself in the right position so that you can make wiser financial choices moving forward.
That's a great point about the avoidance is when we're accumulating debt, the last thing we want to look at is our balance statement. The last thing we want to look at is our any accounts, whether it's investment, whether it's our credit card account. But that's worse because the less in tune and aware we are of our finances, the deeper the hole is going to be. So obviously, yeah, avoidance would be, one other thing that would happen with our mental health or, like our mental capacity and when we're accumulating more debt. And that's something we really have to avoid because the more we distance ourselves from it as a means of, trying to not let that seep into our chronic stress, the bigger it can become. But that can be really hard, obviously, because you're having to admit that every day. And when you don't feel like you have a viable solution, then it becomes easier just to engage in avoidance.
I'm not going to repeat everything my colleague said here, but that's exactly, I was thinking avoidance and shame as well. Those were my top two thoughts when I saw this question. And I'm going to just echo what Derek said is if we have the tools, if we give people the tools to know how to dig ourselves out and even how to make wise choices from the beginning, then we don't end up in those situations. Because even someone that's, savvy, we'd rather you not, like, I might know how to manage something, but I'd rather not get myself into that spot in the first place. So teaching people how to avoid these situations, and then the people that are already there, giving them the tools how to effectively dig themselves out. Because if it's much harder, it's easier to avoid something, or it's more tempting to avoid something if you don't know how to deal with it. In my experience, I'm more tempted to avoid and not look at something if I don't know how to deal with it and I don't even know who to ask. Whereas if I have the tools, it's easier to just sit down and, really dig in there and try to unbury myself and get that process started. So anyway, good answers, guys.
Perfect, Aubrey. That's just a great way to wrap up the question. And, I totally agree with what you guys are saying. And it really is it's easier to avoid getting into the trap than it is to get out of the trap. As we all, I can just say from my own personal experience that it is just easier to avoid it. So that's a large part of why we're all here, because we want to help people avoid it if they can, or at least be thoughtful before they undertake more debt. And then if they are in debt, to give them the tools and to help them understand what resources are that will actually help them get out of debt. And then, as Charles was saying, just would help alleviate some of the mental health issues with that. So that is a perfect segue into question number 2. And that is, what strategies can individuals use to cope with the stress of being in debt?
I'll go ahead and jump in. And I'm going to speak from personal experience. And I think I've shared this previously. My cousin Jaman Doucette has been a great asset to me. And so I think having a money mentor is very important. So when you are in these stressful situations, you have someone that you can lean on and ask questions to so you're not alone in dealing with these stressful situations. Yes, it can be embarrassing. It can be shameful to say, hey, I have this much debt. I don't know what I'm going to do. How do I get out of this situation? But having someone that is experienced, that knows how to manage money well, that can give you some good advice is very helpful. I remember I was in a situation where I received some funds and I was like, hey, what should I do with this money? He was like, how much debt do you have? How much credit card debt do you have? He said, I want you to tackle that first. And I was maybe 23 at the time, and I had taken on some credit cards from being in college. And so looking back on that decision that I made back then to tackle those credit cards set me up for success years later to be able to buy my first house and to do different things like that because I had a decent credit score. And at the time, I didn't want to do that because I was like, hey, I can go buy this or that now. But having that mindset and having someone that I could lean on during that time was very helpful. So money mentors are super important, and I think they could be a great resource in times of stress.
Yeah, well, the first thing to like before you can, really start to assess how to get out of it is to reset. The worst thing is the stress is really in a lot, mental health disorders, really like specifically like anxiety, and we're talking about chronic stress here, is it's in the past or the future. So like when you're in that debt cycle, you look at all the mistakes you made and think, oh my God, if I just did this differently, I would be here, and like this would be my future. And you're kind of lost in this rumination, and then that amplifies your anxiety. You have to just accept I'm here. Like this is where I'm at. Where can I go moving forwards? You can't look at where you could be or where you should be. It's like I'm here. I'm in the present. This is my debt level. What can I do now? Because if you keep looking at the where you what it should is, that can lead to more impulsive spending. That can lead to avoidance. You're just going to avoid trying to think. Like think about the debt you have that reminds you of where you could have been. You really have to learn how to reset. That can either be through like breathing techniques, grounding techniques. Just get your sensory input in the present. Meditation helps reset that mind. Just be like, okay, I'm human. I made some mistakes. I wish things could have been better, but like I can't let that, like shame and guilt dictate cause me to keep making decisions moving forward. Because if anything, being that like in that mindset is going to make your situation worse. So you really have to reset, and from there be okay. What can I do moving forwards to make the situation better? And it's not going to be a quick fix. That is a hard thing to get out of, but there is hope as long as you can reset and see the path forward in a sustainable way.
Well, Charles, that's a great insight. Because one of the things that, as you said, understanding where you are and accepting that is huge, and realizing that it's just a temporary thing. It's where you are now. That doesn't mean this is what the rest of your life's going to look like. And having the ability to sit with that and to talk about it. And it goes back to what Derek was saying, having a money mentor or having somebody that you can just share this with and go, okay, look at this. It will help with shame. And so whether that's with a friend or somebody that you trust, or it's even a mental health expert can provide a lot of those types of ideas. And another coping strategy, I think it really is just when you talk about it, sit down and do a budget and start to see a path forward. And it's not going to change overnight, but at least you can say, if I do this and this and this, and I keep doing it, I'm going to see the change that I want. And like Derek talked about, eliminating credit card debt. That's one of the key things with setting up a financial plan and a budget, even at a beginning level. You pay off the high stuff early. That's the snowball effect. And it really does help you to do those types of things. And you can also explore temporary solutions when you're looking at the stress, and just part of the stress is like, how do I get out of this? So you can go to your utilities and say, hey, can I get on a budget plan? Or can you go to, talk to your bank about maybe, can I just do interest only payments on my mortgage for a while until I can kind of get this thing kind of stabilized? So there's a lot of practical things that you can do. And what you said, Charles, I thought was so important, was about practicing self-care, just getting yourself out of that mindset of, oh my goodness sakes, this is just catastrophic, because it isn't. It's not pleasant, right? We know that, but you can easily come out of it if you just take some steps and you move yourself forward. So I think those are really, really great solutions that we have. So any other comments on that question before we move forward? Okay,
I just think it was just so great, and I think everyone really takes. I just want to add to what you both said, Charles and Deb, that Charles, when you said "I'm here," I just thought that was just so powerful. Like that's gonna stick with me. I really believe that when I'm talking to other folks, and even for myself, that I'm here, accept the situation, and all right. And like you said, let's put together some action steps to move forward. And so I just love that. I just really hope that our listeners take that from what you all share, because those were very, very, very powerful.
Appreciate that, Derek. Thank you. And it really is. We just want everybody to understand that there are simple solutions, and it's just this taking small steps day in and day out is what makes the change. But let's go ahead and go on to question number 3, which was, how can society better support those that are struggling with debt? Now, this is an interesting question.
Yes, and there's probably about 1 million answers to this question. um, just as a young person who started at a credit union and worked there and helped a lot of people my age kind of get started with their credit or their lending experience, opened a lot of first time credit cards, first time car loans, etc. I was pretty shocked to see how little um, people understood about money or how credit worked or how interest worked. My parents had given me kind of a fundamental foundation on that. So I had an idea. I at least had the idea that this is something I had to control. Like I couldn't just let this get away. I can't just treat this as free money. But it seemed like there was very little fundamental understanding of what a credit card was and how it functioned and how deep that hole can go when not managed properly. And so I think that fundamental education in schools being something that a lot of states in the US have finally put in the legislation that the schools have to teach. That's 101. And then I think that better, if credit cards are going to be advertised, that they're advertised in maybe something similar to you think of the pharma ads on TV where it's like, your elbow feels better, but may cause stroke, something like that. I wish they could do something like that on, all of the ads, just like giving a better picture instead of it just saying 27% interest, giving more of a disclosure as to what that actually looks like in real time with a credit card compounding interest. People don't understand what that means because they're advertising this for a refrigerator that's thousands of dollars and it's only 25% interest. What's the big deal? That's a big deal. And so just I think better disclosures would be awesome personally. And then parents taking the time and making the effort to talk to their kids, even if you're not a financial expert yourself, just communicating to your children that they need to be very, very careful and conscientious of how they're spending, and at least encouraging your kids to do their own research when they do finally go out there. If you don't feel like you can explain the numbers, you can't put compound interest into terms, encouraging them to go look that up and find out, run a quick calculator, figure out what they're actually spending when they're swiping that credit card, and not just assuming that, that they know what they're really getting into, so that they have an idea of the gravity of, credit cards, for example. Those are just three things that came to my mind initially.
Well, like a big thing is to kind of normalize the talk about debt. When debt's said, it's like a very negative connotation, and that can lead to that avoidance, right? No one, people feel ashamed to openly admit I'm in debt, I'm struggling, I need help. So kind of normalizing that it's like, debt is not a total failure on your part. It happens to a lot of people. There's a way out. It's normal to be anxious. It's normal to feel shame. It's normal to feel hopeless, but there's a way out. And so, like, if we can normalize the conversation, people are going to be willing more to reach out for help when they need it. Access to mental health services is big. I know some mental health professionals can specialize more in financial trauma. So kind of increasing that access, or even just having that the first point of that conversation normalizing, people are going to be more willing to reach out to mental health professionals that specialize in financial trauma. And yeah, so those would be the two things on the mental health side, I would say. Yeah, normalizing conversations and increasing access or encouragement for people to seek health, mental health professional.
And I'll go ahead and add, okay, disclaimer first. You can't trust anyone, but social media could be a good tool and a resource to help cope with stress when it comes to debt, because there are some good influencers out there. But like I said, you should just be mindful, maybe follow them for a while and make sure that their advice that they're sharing aligns up with research and other data that's out there also. Hassan Thomas, someone that's a family member and friend of DGSF and Sealing, provides great financial information. Tony Stewart, who will be with us in a few weeks on some of our panels, and Matt Gardner. Those are some people that I personally know and have worked with, and they provide excellent advice. But so just be mindful of who's out there. Yes, it can be a great tool, but then also there are scammers out there and different people. So just follow and just make sure that the information that they share is aligned to, like I said, research, and that it's vetted information.
Derek, that's some great points. And I'll tell you guys, your insights are just phenomenal, just from not the mental health aspect as well as practical steps for debt. And one of the things that we can talk to people about when they're feeling the stress of debt is, again, the solutions to, as you talked about, Charles, is to normalize their feelings, to understand it's okay to talk about it. And one of the things that I found that it's really helpful for people to understand is that not all debt is bad. Some debt is good, and some debt is very helpful to achieve your goals. So it really is kind of individualized to what you need. And credit card debt has been touted as easy money, and I think one of the challenges that especially younger people have is that we used to have dollar bills, and we used to walk around and pay cash. And if you open up your wallet and you only had $3 left, you weren't looking at the $20 item. But now that it's all a debit card and a credit card, you swipe the card, and I think we have a tendency to lose focus of where our finances actually are until we go look at the statement, or we get the statement, right? And then all of a sudden we go, holy moly, right? It can be a little bit challenging, but one of the things that we can also talk to people about is they can go to consumer credit counseling. There's all kinds of resources you can do there, either locally. I mean, there's a lot of advocacy groups that you can see locally within your community. You can also go to National Consumer Credit Counseling, Consumer Credit Financial Bureau. There's a lot of places where you can get that kind of help. They're actually certified counselors. They can review your situation and they can give you some advice. They can help you come up with a debt management plan. And those are all things that will help you cope with that stress. So the society can actually help us with this. These are agencies that are there. Government services, again, I talked about earlier, maybe subsidized housing, or, make sure there's possibility of getting food assistance or support from your local community that will help you. And so there's lots of options, but as Charles said, you have to be comfortable talking about it and to realize that this is not a permanent place. This is a temporary situation that it's okay to ask for help for. So you can actually get the resources that you need, get the education that you need, as you talked about, Aubrey. I mean, as you can see by what's sitting behind me, I'm a huge proponent of education, and the younger, the better. But it really does help people when they realize that there are simple things that they can do that will allow them to start to understand their debt, as Charles said, to how they can feel normal and feel okay about it, so they could stay in their logical mind versus getting anxious and getting afraid and getting depressed, and then giving themselves the tools to be able to help make that happen. So I think that was a great discussion for that. Does anybody on the panel have any more comments that you'd like to share before we wrap up for today?
Yeah, just the conversation about credit cards you guys are bringing up. That's just like such a tough thing. I know friends that I went to college with that racked up a lot of debt when they got out because there's no immediate consequence, and we're in an environment that's constantly stimulating, and we want immediate gratification, and you get that without the consequence. Whereas like you said, you used to look in your wallet, you're seeing the consequence. Your money is not as much as it used to be. The credit card, you don't see that until the end of the month. So like, just like having more awareness of credit cards, like what hole it can dig you in, knowing like, yeah, you can get things up front, but there is, you have to make that payment. So to be more mindful of that. And also just the craziest thing to me is like how people I know that have zero income, a lot of student loan debt, are getting approved for credit cards. Like they have zero income. Like how is that allowed? So like one thing as a society is maybe like don't allow that to happen, where someone with zero income could just get a credit card and rack up a bunch of debt. I mean, that just sounded crazy to me when my friend told me that.
Is Charles, it wasn't that many years ago that you could actually get a mortgage on a stated income application. That made my head hurt.
Wow.
Because I'm looking at them going, you just got a loan for $400,000 and you can't prove that you make $40,000 a year. How does that work? And the banks were kind of, because of Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and some of the, like you said, it's easy to get this stuff, but people don't understand. It's the lack of education. What does this cost them? And the ease of getting it and the desire to, and some of this maybe comes, is deeper than just the debt. It's like people want to belong. They want to feel like they matter. They want to feel like they're important. And some of that stuff stems from other things in their life. And then they find themselves on the hook for this, and it can become a really big deal. So yeah, it's you're really wise when you say that, Charles.
Just what you both were saying made me think about something that Anthony O'Neill said once. He said, if you can't afford to buy it twice, you can't afford it. And so if you don't have the cash in the bank to afford that thing, to buy it twice, it's not worth it. So I don't know, that just stuck with me, and just listening to what you two were sharing made me think about that. And so I think it really does come back down to our mindset also, and discipline and self-control, that if you can't afford it, leave it there. Figure out something else or save for it. Figure out another way.
Great.
And
Great
onto that,
comments.
boredom is just probably the toughest thing. Is like when you're bored and you have a credit card, you're gonna go like try to entertain yourself. So like, trying to figure out how to deal with boredom better would be. And I think that's something that's tough on my people younger than me, especially, where they're always so stimulated. Is they're so easy to get bored. What's the easiest solution when you're bored? Just go out and use a credit card.
Yeah. Well, and then every one of us have at least one of these. And I think the last I heard, we get on average 4,000 to 5,000 ads per day. And what do those ads want us to do? Buy something.
Consume.
So we have this in our whole economy is based on, gross domestic product, which is based on consumerism, right? So just fantastic points, guys. So anyway, I think we've had some great discussion for our listeners to understand about debt, and about just really about how we're going to be able to deal with the psychological impacts of the debt and give them some practical solutions. So I want to thank you, panel, for your dedication to sharing your financial and mental health insights on this important topic. As we all have talked about, we could, there's steps we can take, things that we can do. This is not a permanent place to be. And it really is just being open and honest about it and taking one step at a time. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and close us out, and just let everybody know that our next topic in our series is going to be planning for major life events. So people that are looking to navigate finances, if you're thinking about getting married, if you're thinking about buying a home, or if you want to think about retirement, that will be our next topic. So please stay tuned. And we just want to thank everybody for taking the time to join us, and to wish you a pleasant evening. If you feel like something here touched you, please feel free to leave a comment, and we'd be happy to hear from you. Thank you guys all very much.
To view the entire series, go to centralimpact.org.